Three tankers are on fire at the Strait of Hormuz. But is China going to take advantage of that during this time of crisis in the Middle East and take Taiwan? All that and more on the Daily Energy News Beat Daily Standup. How the Israel-Iran crisis is swiftly becoming a Taiwan national security crisis. This is huge. You heard Michael and I talk about the Strait of Hormuz, a global energy lifeline. It's the narrow waterway between Iran, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates is on the world's most critical oil transit choke point. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, approximately 20.9 million barrels per day of oil and products representing 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption passed through the strait in 2023. Additionally, about 20% of the LNG trade goes through there. That is huge. Now, why is this important to Taiwan? And the story points that out. Taiwan, which is nearly all of its energy is imported. They have very little energy manufacturing, is very like open season on this because over 40% of its crude oil imports and significant portion of its LNG, primarily from Qatar, pass through the strait. But here's where this story gets dicey. At a World at War post on X, China is preparing for an invasion of Taiwan. It's a pretty big allegation, but they keep going into some more here. The U.S. will soon be involved in the conflict against Iran. China will see this as a major provocation. Why? And they go into what we've talked about, and that is China is Iran's biggest oil client, with the country's private refiners buying most of Iran's sanctioned crude. So this is huge. If the U.S. or Iran stop the crude, China's going to get grumpy and they're going to possibly act on Taiwan. So this is actually a huge issue for President Trump. And I have no doubt that they're going to be able to negotiate this through this. But global and regional implications underscores the interconnectedness of global energy markets and geopolitical flashpoints. For Taiwan, the immediate risk of an energy supply crunch, but the longer term threat lies in China's potential to capitalize on regional instability. And with the U.S. Nimitz coming from the Asia market over to this side of the pond, you're going to have some issues going on. So it was a pretty interesting story. I've got two tanker stories. Speaking of the Strait of Hormuz, there's brewing crisis for total global energy markets. This is critical from a couple different stories, and Hustlebitch on X posted out tanker erupts in flames off the UAE coast right next to the world's oil lifeline, which is the Strait of Hormuz. The Adelan just went up in flames after colliding with the Front Eagle in the Gulf of Oman, only 22 miles from Khorfakkan, dangerously close to the strait. And when you sit back, this is very important. This article I went ahead and also put in from Geography Host. How important is the Strait of Hormuz? It's easy when you just click on the story and take a look, and you can see how it impacts and where it is. Energy stocks are up. And as I'm recording this at 5:03 the day before, oil was at 77.06. It was up $3.83 today and $75.49 for WTI. So when we sit back and take a look, the market is understanding that, hey, as long as Iran is not bombed totally out in there, that price is going to hold for a little while. As soon as Israel goes nuts and starts bombing the Iranian supply, which is about 3 million barrels a day, that's going to get China grumpy, which is going to then cause some other issues. So we're in a very fluid, holy cow, Batman moment right now. This next story, Laden Frontline VLCC collides with shadow suezmax tanker off of the Khorfakkan area. And I apologize for our podcast listeners in case I mispronounce that. I'm not trying to be rude. So a collision occurred 1:14 a.m. Dubai time the night before, But here's where a key point of this is the spokesperson for Frontline that said the following immediate action was taken to extinguish a fire on the front Eagle. A full investigation will be carried out to determine the cause of it. But their transponders were turned off because they were sanctioned vehicles coming out from Iran. So when you're talking about GPS spoofing, doping, and a zombie ship, you're talking about the Dark Fleet. And the Dark Fleet, this was not a bombing or a terrorist attack. This was a choke point with transponders turned off because of sanctions, but still a very, very important thing. Part of the Dark Fleet, there's about 1,400 different tankers in the Dark Fleet. I believe Russia's Dark Fleet is about 683, somewhere around in that number. Iran has X number. I believe it's around 200, somewhere around in there. But they change hands. Some of them like change the flag or they'll do this. So those are ballpark numbers and very fluid. Let's go to this last story here. Before I go to my last story, though, I want to give Steve Reese a shout out. If you are in the oil and gas space and if you are wanting to move molecules from the Haynesville to Germany, Steve Reese, ReeseEnergyConsulting.com is where you want to go to. They know how to source natural gas for a data center. They know how to move molecules. They know how to do auditing and make sure that you get all of the money that you need. We also have another sponsor coming on. We'll fill you in on that as we start getting some ads rolling and things. It's pretty cool news around here. Let's go to this last story here. China's death grip on rare earth minerals, regulatory hurdles, and the U.S. processing efforts. Trump administration gains investment opportunities. There's a lot in this story going on. And you've heard Michael and I talk about a stranglehold in the West, a real problem around renewable, not necessarily renewable energy, but just rare earth minerals and critical minerals. There's two different things, but they're almost interchangeable with some of them. China has 70% of its rare earth imports and domestic processing is virtually non-existent. The U.S. relies on China for 70% of our rare earth imports, and domestic processing is virtually non-existent. Gallium is the only one that's coming online to be able to produce, I believe, 50% of what we need. That's one out of all of the different minerals that we need. The article outlines out regulatory hurdles in the United States, permitting delays, environmental concern, lack of expertise, rut-row, economic viability, thin profit margins, and China's ability to suppress global prices deter investment. I think that this is critical, and the way things are changing, and we're seeing that the Trump tariff wars actually did not turn out to be a bad thing. And President Trump and Scott Bessent actually did a phenomenal job in getting it to this point. Hats off to the Trump team on doing that. So I would take a look as an investor at the markets, and I've got some other investor CEOs that I've lined up coming up to talk about rare earth minerals, investing in rare earth, and also in other commodities. When we take a look at the administration gains, the trade deal with China in June announced a tentative agreement to resume the talks. Executive Order 14241, this streamlined permitting for domestic minerals and projects. So they're on it. It invoked the Defense Production Act, the DPA, to fund mining and processes. That is huge. Getting us tariff exemptions on this. I have to hand it to the entire energy team of Secretary Burgum, Secretary Wright, and Lee Zeldin for really supporting President Trump through this thing. We take a look at the death grip on rare earth minerals, expose the West's problem, and closing the gap will take years to try to get this thing solved out. We don't have years. We got a year at the most. But sit back and take a look at your portfolio and Gold may not be the only one for you to break apart and take a look at your portfolio. Take a look at your portfolio and say, do I want some higher gains? Look at geranium mining or any of those other kinds of mines and say, wait a minute, this is important for this kind of sector. This is a defense need. This is a huge issue, and a lot of money can be made when you've pick apart your portfolio and pick and choose in the rare earth minerals and production. Make sure you check the management of those companies, check their performance. Very much like the ExxonMobil CEO, Darren Woods, when he was on with Brett Baer. I put that article out on Substack this morning, yes, so it'd be yesterday. He did an outstanding job. And as an investor looking at ExxonMobil, not only would I look at their buyback program or their fees back or their stock, whether or not it's a day trade or it's however you want to look at it. But the CEO is very critical when making a determination, and hats off was to Darren Woods at ExxonMobil. That was an outstanding interview with Brett Baird. That's on the energynewsbeat.substack.com. Go out there and check out that article. So with that, like, subscribe, share this, read this to your pets. If you want to really bore your spouse, just read this to your spouse and have a great evening. Talk to you all soon.